One API One APIA Nevada is a grassroots nonprofit organization that advocates for policies empowering everyday Asian Pacific Islander Nevadans. Nevada is home to a growing APIA community, accounting for 1 in 10 voters. Concealy Incorporated is Nevada's premier Democratic campaign firm, fighting for progressive issues and candidates for over a decade, and proud sponsor of Battleborn Progress.
This episode of Out in Front brought to you by
Concealy Inc., Nevada State Education Association, 1APIA Nevada, Silver State Voices, and Stefan and Marta Schmidt, as well as our episode sponsors, Save Lives Nevada and Washoe Education Association.
Country and here in Nevada. And right around that time was when the Buffalo massacre happened. And fast forward now, we are several more mass shootings in from that episode. And, we've lost countless lives due to gun violence once again. And so tonight we wanted to have an episode where we talk about solutions, where we talk to survivors, where we talk to a teacher, and really discuss what needs to come next when it comes to gun violence prevention and how we start preventing these tragedies. After every tragedy, I know my team and I, including the one here in Vegas, have the discussion of what will it take to end this? What will it take to actually have real change be made? And I think here in Nevada, we've taken a lot of really important steps to make change at the legislative level, implementing extreme risk protection orders, implementing the ghost guns ban. And we've been doing our part here in Nevada, but now it's time for federally our elected officials to do their part and really take up some action on this. Now, just before this show airs, the House Judiciary Committee just passed the Protect Our Kids Act, which is a gun violence prevention piece of legislation that is currently being moved in response to the tragedy in Texas. But is it enough? And what do we need to do next? So we're going to hear from some of the incredible advocates that we work with across the state and across the country tonight to talk just about that. So I want to introduce our panel of guests this evening. Sorry if I don't sound like my normal cheery self. This topic is really hard to talk about for all of us, but I think it's especially hard to talk about when we just did a show on this 3 weeks ago, and now we're doing this again. So the first speaker we have tonight is one of our dear friends and somebody I love dearly, Heather Salon. Salon. She told me it's like Fallon, so I'm going to say it right. Heather Salon. She is a 1 October survivor and has been on the show before. So Heather, I want to welcome you back and thank you for your incredible advocacy. The next one is a teacher from Washoe County Education Association, Selena LaRue Hatch. She is with WEA up in Northern Nevada, and she also teaches high school social studies in Washoe County. And then two of my dear friends who I got to know during the Las Vegas tragedy, Sandy and Lonnie Phillips. They're with Survivors Empowered, and they do incredible work all around the country in response to mass shootings. So I want to thank you all for being here. Heather, I want to bring you in first. Thank you so much for joining us again, Heather. We always appreciate your outlook on this show and, really appreciate your thoughts on gun violence prevention as a survivor. So talk to our audience about your experience as a survivor of 1 October and why you got involved in the fight to end gun violence, and maybe share a little bit more about your experience as you feel comfortable with. So we just want to know kind of your story and your background before we dive in.
Thank you. I'm really happy to be on your show. I appreciate all the advocacy that you do for the state and with everybody. My name's Heather Sallin, and I was in the Las Vegas Country Music Festival mass shooting. And, what happened to me is what's happening daily across our country. And the sad and tragic fact of what happened to me is it's just such old news that it doesn't matter. And I'm not saying that because it's changed my every fiber of my life being in that shooting. When the gunfire opened, people were being shot and killed around me. My brain blew, like what was going on around me, and the fear and the magnitude of fear that I was in was unfathomable. And that's what's going on right now, every day in this country, and like when I talk about what I went through, it's like, people always come up to me, they're like, I can't imagine. And I'm like, no, you cannot imagine what I've been through. And I hope that in your lifetime, you will never, ever have to imagine what I've been through. But unfortunately, as the years have gone now, it keeps getting closer and closer and closer. And I went to a meditation retreat in Massachusetts for mass shooting survivors. And it was about a year after the shooting. It was coming up on the year, and it was, Survivors Empowered helped organize this. And I met other shooting survivors from around the country, and I'll never forget Connie, who is at Columbine. She said to all of us in the room, the Parkland had happened and the synagogue shooting in Pittsburgh had happened. And those were most predominantly the people that were there. And she said, I don't know how you all heal. We had years and years and years, and you guys don't get that. And I was coming up on my 1 year of the Las Vegas mass shooting anniversary. And I was with the Parkland people, and I was with the synagogue people. And what struck me was that I was the veteran now. Like my shooting, I was the one, it gives me the chills. I was the one who had to look at them and say, you're going to be okay. And here's what's going to happen to you. And here's when the anniversary happens. Here's what you're going to go through. And I just thought, how disgusting to be that close to my experience and what I went through, that I was now like at the forefront of all of these people who are behind me now, who have to deal with the same devastations that I have to put my life back together. So I'm here again, talking about the aftermath of these experiences. And I just want to say really quickly, when I knew this was a bad one, because my phone started lighting up, I get a heart. And then, 3 minutes later, thinking of you. And 3 minutes later, are you okay? And I'm literally like, oh my God, what could have happened? Because people stopped doing that because there's so many shootings now. And when this came through and I saw what happened again, I thought, when Sandy Hook happened, when my shooting happened, I thought, things have to change because this is so big. This is so big, something has to happen. And then after however many months and however much advocacy that I did, I look back at, and I realized, if they didn't change gun laws when kindergartners were killed, why are they going to do it when we were? And it's gone on. And now with more children being slaughtered, I mean, here we are again. And how are we allowing this to happen in our country and act like we are safe?
Heather, I want to, before I get to my next question, I wanted to ask you about this because I wasn't in the shooting, but it happened in our backyard, right? I've lived here my entire life, born and raised. And when something like that, I feel like happens in a community, it also changes the community. And sometimes for the better. I think it was a wake-up call for Las Vegas in many ways. But, now when mass shootings happen, I remember that morning waking up and I was cold and I was shaking and I was so horrified because it had finally happened in Nevada, right? It had finally come knocking on my door after years of advocacy on these issues. And now I find myself, I just get mad and I almost disengage now when it happens, because it disgusts me so much that we're continuing to let this happen. What are your reactions when these things happen?
I mean, if I could like give you a visual, it's like metal doors just go around me. And my brain short circuits. And what I always go to, you know, everyone else thinks about these poor children who are gone and their families, and they should. I think about all those people that were in the classrooms around, that heard the shooting, that heard that noise, that will never, ever be okay again because of it. And I think about their parents trying to reach them and how they're not going to be okay. I mean, when I say never going to be okay, we can all be okay, but it is so much work. And, you know, so for me, I just literally, I have to protect myself. I've had to insulate myself in a really, really severe way around the shootings. And what I've really had to focus on for my mental health and my life is on the healing part of what it is that I've gone through. And, you know, I just try to repair the trauma effect over and over and over.
So speaking of that trauma effect, we have heard on this show time and time again from you, from other survivors, about the continued trauma that's activated when incidents like the recent school shooting and the Buffalo supermarket shooting, and now yesterday, when we wrote this, the shooting in Oklahoma had not even happened, right? There were 3 mass shootings yesterday at the same time. The one that made the news that they decided to cover was the one in Oklahoma, because 4 people were dead in a hospital because of an AR-15 again. So if so, what are some strategies that you can share to help folks deal with the reoccurring incidents of gun violence, and what do you do to protect yourself and insulate yourself, and how do people at home start to protect themselves? Because I think a lot of us who've never lived through this before, like you have, are also now feeling trauma from seeing it over and over and over again in the news, and not to the level that you have, obviously, but it's still traumatizing to see, you know, little kids who are murdered and people in a hospital who are murdered, or people at a concert who are murdered.
I mean, the answer to that is get off the news and get into action. Like, stop sitting in front of your TV, traumatizing yourself for hours and hours and hours and hours, watching these horrific things, understand what's happening, and just freaking get up and be loud and be a voice. And the thing that really, really gets me at this point is, because I did a lot of gun violence advocacy. I did it with you. I went and I helped try to get gun laws changed in the state of Nevada. And you know what I'm really tired of? I'm tired of the language we have to use so that it's inclusive, so that we're not pushing out the people that, you know, want their guns. And I'm literally like, how well is that working? You know, it's like when I'm like, I don't like guns. It's just certain kinds of guns. I'm going to tell you at this point, I'm not a fan of guns. Like, if you want to go hunt, go hunt. But if you think there's another reason that you need to have a gun and that this is not going to change, I'm sorry, I don't see that anymore. And I think the conversation needs to become more aggressive, where people like stop tiptoeing around the NRA and the people. We don't want to hurt their feelings and make them not vote for it. They're not doing it anyway. And that's where I'm angry. I'm done with the light conversation about trying not to offend anybody. It's like, I'm sick of it. This is a pervasive, life-ending problem that is destroying our country from the inside. And if people don't see that for what it is, then wake up.
Couldn't agree more. All right, Heather, we're going to come back to you for that justifiable rage in just a little bit. So hang on to it. Selena, I want to bring you in. Thank you for joining us. You know, as a teacher in the Washoe County School District, what concerns do you have about gun violence, especially as it relates to yourself and the students that you teach every single day?
Yeah, no, thank you for having me. So as you said, I am a teacher up in Washoe County. I teach high school, and I am just deeply concerned for my students and for our fellow staff. Gun violence is now the leading cause of death in children. That is horrifying. That is horrifying. It's not cancer. It's not something that we don't have a cure for. It is something that we are bringing into our society that is killing children. And that horrifies me, and also makes me wonder, what are we doing as a society that we can't keep our children safe? To me, the most basic function of government is to keep our citizens and our people safe. And we are failing in that right now. And I'm also really frustrated because when these tragedies happen, I feel like the proposals oftentimes fall on re-traumatizing kids. Like, let's have more drills that traumatize our kids. Let's harden our schools. Let's put more burden on the teachers rather than actually have common sense discussions on how to address this problem. We focus on these minutia in each specific event instead of the larger scale societal problems. And so that is a huge source of frustration, I think, for me and many educators.
And Selena, this isn't one of the questions that I gave you ahead of time, but it is one of the questions I've been thinking about a lot this week. And I've seen some memes about it on social media. I think the thing that pisses me off the most, and my mother's an educator, right? She works in an elementary school that I went to, and she's on the front line. She's the office manager. So she would be the one to encounter this first at the school that I went to. We have all these right-wing extremists that Heather's talking about sitting here saying, oh, well, it's not the guns that are doing this. It's stigmatizing mental health. I have mental health. I've never gone and shot anybody. Okay. Or we got to arm our teachers. So wait, we're going to arm our teachers, the same teachers you think are out there teaching, your kids all this horrific stuff, and they're groomers, but you want to arm them. So I just don't understand the rights mentality. I mean, I don't understand the rights mentality at all, but I really don't in this one, where you're sitting here saying that teachers are unfit to teach and unfit to teach your children, and you know best, but we should arm those same teachers with guns to protect your kids. Make that make sense for me.
Well, and it doesn't make sense. Let's just be clear on that one. It is this dichotomy of teachers are incompetent, and also we're brainwashing everyone, and also we're supposed to defend students with our lives, which I will tell you, any teacher that I know would do so. And we saw that last week. We would defend our students with our lives, but we are not trained to do so. We are not soldiers. We are not police officers. We have not gone through firearms training. And so I agree with you, this idea that at the same time we're these huge villains, while you also want to give us guns to defend children, doesn't really make sense. And when people talk about arming teachers, I often like to point out to people, like, just think back to school, think about your craziest teacher. So we all had one, right? And now think about them with a gun, right? And that usually gets a laugh from people. But again, we are not trained for this. And to me, I think also there's this fallacy of the only thing that stops a bad guy with a gun is a good guy with a gun. Well, guess what? Last week, that didn't work out. And there were children that were calling 911 over and over again, begging for help. And that is so heartbreaking to me, to think about those children in those rooms who've been taught, call the police and they'll help you. And they're doing that over and over again. And it didn't result in help for them. And to me, if we have a situation where someone has a gun that is so powerful that the police are afraid to engage that person, then what hope is there for teachers or children or office staff or anyone else in these schools?
Yeah, and no bulletproof backpack or bulletproof book or any other bullshit that they want to put out there. Because I'm sorry, y'all, like, I'm real mad about this at this point. Any of these things, these NRA talking points that are out there, it's bullshit. And I'm so tired of hearing it. I'm so tired of hearing it out of the mouths of the people we elect. Like, just get something done, for Christ's sake, because people are dying. They are losing their lives, or they're traumatized forever, as Heather just said. And I'm sorry, like, I'm not here to see 10-year-olds get shot in the face. Like, that is just insane to me, that we live in a country where this is happening over and over and over again. That is the definition of insanity. And these mental health arguments, sorry, Selena, I'm going to go off for 2 seconds. These mental health arguments are just such crap. Joe Biden himself said it the other day. All across the world, there are countries with mental health crises on their hands. People all around the world have mental health issues. Again, I have mental health issues. Never once in my life have I ever thought about going into a kindergarten room and shooting someone. That's just not a thing that's ever crossed my mind, nor should it be. And so I don't understand stigmatizing people with mental health issues simply because you don't want to give up your guns. It's disgusting. All right, Selena, let's keep going. I could talk about this all day. So we've talked about this a lot, but I want you to go a little deeper. So what are your thoughts as a teacher about the Texas school shooting last week? I know it has to be terrifying for students and teachers each time we see a school shooting, but this one in particular was somehow even more horrifying than some of the recent ones.
Yeah, no, I do think it was different and I know people are saying that a lot, but it was truly horrifying. I mean, I openly wept as I was reading about what happened, as I heard interviews of parents discovering their children. It is just beyond comprehension. And so I think that a lot of teachers are very upset. I think a lot of students are concerned. It is interesting though, I do teach high school. My kids aren't always paying attention to the news. And I do think they've kind of become numb to this sort of thing. So my kids aren't talking about it as much. But I know that as teachers, I had to have a conversation with my husband this week about what I would do if we had an active shooter. And, I had to talk to him about the fact that I know I would give my life for my students. That's just who I am. I would defend them. And I had to ask him if he thought that was selfish because I would be gone, leaving him and my daughter behind. I mean, we had to have a big, deep emotional discussion about that, which most people don't normally need to have those discussions. I had a teacher this week. I'm the union rep for our school. And so she came and talked to me and said, hey, I have to put in my resignation. I have a baby. I can't be worried about dying every single day. I need to get home to my child. And so it is a stress that everyone is going through. Even if it's not always on your mind every time you walk into a school, it is definitely in the back of your mind. There is definitely a part of you that thinks about it. And as a parent, my daughter is 4. She's about to start kindergarten next year. And I was so deeply upset just thinking about the fact that I'm going to have to worry every single day if that's going to be the last day that I see her. And I think parents across the country are thinking about that. And also, she's going to be 5 years old and she's going to go through active shooter drills. I don't know if you've seen the cutesy little rhymes that they put up for the kindergartners where they make a little sing song about being quiet and hiding from bad guys in the corner so they can practice the active shooter drills. And it's like her innocence is going to be broken at 5 years old because she's now going to have to worry about this. And I'm going to have that conversation with her of, don't worry, honey, you don't need to worry every single day about being shot, but you also should know the protocol because it's possible. Like that is a horrible balance that parents have to make right now because our leaders are not stepping up and protecting our communities.
All right, I want to ask one more question, then we're going to move to Sandy and Lonnie. And I see your questions coming in. I see the outrage coming in the chat. So make sure you keep it coming, audience. We're going to get to all the audience questions in just a little bit. If you have questions for our fabulous panel this evening, put them in the chat and we'll get to them in just a few minutes. So Selena, I want to stay with you for one more question. We talked a little bit about this, but I want to dive in a little deeper on this too. I'm getting ahead of myself because of my rage. So obviously, like I said, you've heard the ridiculous talking points. Let's just give every teacher a gun. Talk to me about why giving teachers or librarians or school principals or office managers a gun will not work and is not the answer to this. More guns is not the answer.
Well, I honestly am concerned about the idea of more guns around children because it doesn't matter how safe you think people are storing them. Children having more access to guns is more dangerous in itself, right? Up here in Washoe, we had a shooting several years ago at Sparks Middle School where a child got access to an unsecured firearm at home and brought it. And I think part of it, when you're dealing with children that are super emotional, that kid was really upset that day and thought that bringing a gun to school was going to solve his problems. Kids having access to guns is not going to be a solution. Also, if there is an actual scenario where there is a shooter or there is a danger, having more bullets flying across the room is also not going to be a solution. More bullets flying across the room means there's going to be more casualties for children. And I think the larger issue here, which we see over and over again with education, is that rather than dealing with societal systemic problems like gun violence, hunger, poverty, addiction, they just keep putting it on teachers. I'm in charge of feeding my kids. I'm in charge of counseling my kids. I'm now in charge of defending them with my life. We keep putting this Band-Aid of the educators will fix it. The educators will make sure the kids are okay, instead of actually dealing with our societal problems. And I just think teachers and educators and librarians, all of them are so already overburdened. And now, not only do you want them to do the billion things you've already put on their plate, you want them to become active, trained soldiers to defend children in a battleground. Think about how dystopian that sounds if that's the place we are as a society.
Yeah, instead of just like, passing some good laws and actually, regulating a well-regulated militia. Lonnie and Sandy, I want to bring you in. I'm gonna talk to you together, but we'll answer questions separately. Sandy, thank you for joining us. I'll come to you first. Tell the audience about your daughter, Jessica, and the work that you all do to help survivors overcome the pain and the grief they feel after losing a loved one to gun violence.
It's been 10 years since Jessie was killed in the Aurora theater shooting, and it's still hard to talk about her. Even though we talk about her all the time, it's still hard to talk about her and the way she died. She was a very kind human being. And even as a toddler, she was the one in her nursery school class that always went over and welcomed the new kid. And if somebody was upset and crying, she was the one that went over and tried to make them feel better. And that's the way she was her entire life. So when she was killed, and Lonnie and I decided to get involved with the survivors, especially, and with the legislation, but especially the survivors. It was just an extension of Jessie. So we do what we do to honor her.
Yeah. And Sandy, you and Lonnie founded an organization called Survivors Empowered. Tell our audience what Survivors Empowered does and the good work that you are doing. Heather talked a little bit about it, but some of the other work that y'all have been doing. I was following your social media the other day and saw you all on a plane down to Texas to help the survivors there. So talk to us about some of that. I know you came here after 1 October. Y'all go wherever you're needed, and that's why we love you.
Well, thank you. Well, first of all, I want to say that Heather and Selena were amazing. I was sitting here just applauding everything they were saying because they are spot on and just so eloquent. So I feel a little pressure to be eloquent. But yes, this shooting that we've just responded to here in Uvalde is the 20th mass shooting we have responded to. And that's just the major public mass shootings. That doesn't count all the smaller ones that happen every day. Doesn't count the ones like in Tulsa that just happened where 5 people, including the killer, was killed. But we do that because we know that there was no one there for us. When this happened to us, we were living in San Antonio, Texas. My daughter was living in Colorado. And when we got the phone call, from the young man that was with her at the theater. And I picked it up and there was all this screaming in the background. I said, "What's going on?" And he said, "There's been a shooting. It's random." And I said, "Are you okay?" And he said, "I think I've been shot twice." And it was in that moment that I realized something really bad has happened or Jessie would be calling me. And I said, "Where is Jessie?" And he said, "I'm sorry, I tried." And I said, "Is she okay?" And he said, "I'm sorry, I tried again." And I said, "Oh God, please tell me she's not dead." And at the end of that conversation, the phone went dead right then. And I let out a primal scream that woke my husband up from the other room. And by the time he got to me, I was sliding down the hall, the wall in the hallway. And he basically picked me up and realized that he was going to be putting the pieces of our lives back together from that moment forward. And we have been, but we've been doing it through not only the support of one another, but the support of a whole lot of other people out there that know what our mission is and believe in our mission. And that mission is to help survivors through that initial shock, and then to be with them and for them for the rest of their lives if they want us to be. It's up to them. You want to be a part of it, fine. If not, that's okay too. We're here for you anytime that you want us to be here. And then, of course, as Heather mentioned, we have our mindfulness classes that are free to any survivor of gun violence. And they're through UCSD, and they have a scientific base to them. So we know that it works, and it helps people with the PTSD symptoms that we all face and all have to deal with, especially each time there's another mass shooting like here lately. So we were in Buffalo when we got word that this had happened in Texas. And I was talking to a survivor and a grassroots organizer on the corner when I started getting pinged, like Heather said, all of a sudden your phone just lights up and you're going, okay, something big's happening. So I excused myself, found out what was going on, came back and said, this is number 19 for us, and we have to leave and go to number 20. So we sure would like it to end here. The first shooting we responded to after our own was Sandy Hook. And here we are, bookends, a very similar shooting at an elementary school. Sure would be nice if we never had to respond to another one. And I think America is finally in the same place that we have been for the last 10 years. They're fed up and they're sick of it. And I think this is the time that we might just be able to get something done.
Well, from your mouth to the goddess's ear, Sandy, because I hope that every single time. And so far, I've been let down every single time.
Yep.
And I know you have too. We were talking about that earlier. What is it that you hope to accomplish by traveling to these mass shootings and working with survivors? I have to imagine that's incredibly hard for you all, kind of reliving that trauma every single time you go to one of these, but also incredibly rewarding to at least get to help people after a tragedy like this.
Is that for Lonnie or for me?
Either one.
Well, I can tell you on my part, Sandy said it, it's like deja vu. This one was deja vu. When we went to Newtown and we saw the survivors, we had dinner with some of them. It was only a few days after, and they were still like zombies. I mean, they could not, they listened and they'd shake their head and they was breathing shallowly, and you could tell that, they weren't really there, but they remembered some things we said, and we continued to stay in touch with them. And so what we felt at that time was, I know we help these people, and this is something that we're just going to have to continue to do. I had my own business for 35, 40 years, and I had no interest in continuing that. And she was working for the state at the time, state of Texas, in tourism. And she had just went on to a new job, and they gave her like a month off to recover, and they waited for her to come back. And then she finally called him and said, look, I can't do this anymore. My husband and I we have a new path. And so
I think too, with Heather said it so beautifully, it changes every fiber of who you used to be. You are now a new person. And we know that trauma changes your DNA and it's held in your body. So unless you treat that and in a way say, this is the new me, this is the new person that I am, and in a way embrace that, you're always going to be stuck. I remember, Lonnie, that the night that we got news of Jesse's death, I said, I don't want to be that mother that everybody feels sorry for and pities. And I don't want to walk into a room and have everybody go, oh, that's that mother. I just wanted to deny that had happened. And he took my shoulders and he said, but sweetheart, that is who you are now. And it was that moment for me that it was like, oh, okay, what do I do with that? So that became kind of the the blueprint of who do I want to become now, because I'm not Jesse's, I'll always be Jesse's mother, but I don't have Jesse now to mother. So what can I do with, and what can we do as a couple to embrace this new life that nobody ever wants?
Yeah. When you all, and Lonnie, Sandy, either one of you can answer this. When you all talk to the survivors right after a mass shooting, you talked a little bit about the young folks in Newtown and the people in Newtown who were survivors. But what do you say to somebody after they've just lived through one of probably the most horrific thing they'll ever live through in their lives? What do you say to somebody after that? And what is the response you get when you talk to these families, like the Texas families? I can't even imagine the grief of losing a child, but losing a child in this horrific way. What is the response that you get usually when you talk to these families?
Well, there's no set response. We don't have a program, or we don't have a list of things we say. I can give you an example. I'll tell you about the Newtown families and how they were. We don't always get to see them right away, and we really don't want to see them right away after Newtown. We knew they weren't going to understand anyway. But in one example, when we went to the Parkland shooting, we always go to the memorial. We wear our badges. And people sometimes, if we see someone crying, we'll go up and start a conversation and find out, were you related, or is it your family member or friend, and start a conversation. Then we sometimes get from that we can continue on. But in this particular case, we were standing in front of the cross of one of the victims, and
My phone rang.
And Sandy's phone rang, and it was the father of the victim. And he had connected, mutual friend of his had connected him with us and asked him to call us, and he did. So when he found out that we were standing in front of Nick's grave.
No, not his grave, his cross.
I meant his cross. Yes. To me, that was symbolizing his grave. It was like, this, and the crosses are at almost every memorial. He became very interested in what we had to say and agreed to meet with us. And that was, I think, the day after.
Mm-hmm. 2 days after the shooting, he actually welcomed us into his home for what we thought would be 15-20 minutes. And we were there 2.5 hours because once I said to his wife, I said, I can't tell you that I know exactly what you're feeling, but I've been walking in your shoes for a while now. And I do know that you don't want to take another breath, that you wish you were dead. And she kind of looked at me like, yeah, how do you know that? And I'm very honest with everyone that if I had had a handgun in our home the night that I got the word that Jesse had been killed, I'm not sure I'd still be here. So it's a terrifying reality that after each mass shooting, there are suicides that take place. And that worries me, especially for this shooting, because of the police response. So I always worry about first responders. And now with this added pressure of, did you do the right thing or the wrong thing? There's pressure there. First responders see things that no human being should ever see. We have teachers that have been affected, and we have parents who are devastated. So all of that has me very, very concerned for their safety. So we start off being very honest, and we say, hey, what you've just walked into is the worst thing that you can ever live through.
And we suggested that they have someone there to take notes or
Yep.
record the conversation, because we knew they weren't going to remember it. And to this day, we're still very, very close to them.
Just talked to him last night.
Yeah.
Yeah.
They're going through the mindfulness classes, and we've become good friends with a lot of the survivors. We just continue to reach out and continue to drip on them and continue to ask them, we're here for you.
I mean, I look around even on this screen, and Heather and I have become very good friends. And Nicole Hockley from Sandy Hook, and her partner Mark Barden, who they both run Sandy Hook Promise. We've become very good friends. Several people from Las Vegas, several people from the Thousand Oaks borderline shooting. I mean, you can go on and on. Pulse. Everyone that we've gone to, we've ended up having a group, a network of people, and I think that's probably one of the most important things we do with our work, is that we let them know they have a network that's out there that they can connect to anytime. The Rebels Project in Colorado that was started by some Columbine people, they have a Facebook page that is only for survivors of gun violence and mass shootings. And that network there has just been a godsend. They also have one for teachers. So between those two, you can go on as much as you want or as little as you want. You can see how people are doing, and then you can reach out to them privately if you want, or just do it on the Facebook page and let it be. But we have a whole network of survivors from coast to coast and border to border, and thousands of them, which is horrible and horrific and also wonderful and incredible at the same time.
So we've been working with Gifford for the past 3 years as consultants, and we were able to put together a booklet, toolkit, if you may, that's put everything that we've learned together, and it starts from the day one until you become, if you want to become active, then we teach you how to fight. So that's been something that we've been very proud of, and it was very, very well received. Actually, this is a shooting that we've used it the first time. We finally got it developed. Yeah. It took us a while, but
it's been online for a while, but this was the first time we've actually been able to present it to anyone. So it felt good to leave there knowing that it was in the hands of the people that needed it most.
So as far as I know, we're the only people that travel, and we've been on the road for the last 7 years in a fifth wheel, traveling to every different mass shooting. And we've written a book, Tragedy in Aurora, the culture of mass shootings in America. If you want to learn how this got started and why we're here where we are now and how we can get out of it, you can read that and learn a lot. It's
almost a textbook the way it's written, but you'll learn everything you ever needed to know about gun violence prevention in it. So,
and we had an author that was Tom Diaz, who has written 3 books, and he was the writer, but he used our story as the arc of the book to make a personal appeal on it. But yeah, it's there.
And for our audience at home, we'll put the link for the book in the chat so that they all can take a look at that. And Sandy and Lonnie, I want to thank you so much for your advocacy and for the work you do with survivors. It is horrifying to me. I was actually typing that to our staff, that there's enough people that have survived gun violence that you can have an entire Facebook group for it. But I'm so glad that y'all are here and doing this incredibly important work. Heather, I want to come back to you because I want to shift now to what we need to do next, where we go from here. Obviously, we've talked a lot tonight about the horrific aftermath of gun violence, but I want to talk about what you and I have been fighting for the past couple of years together. So what policies would you like to see move forward that address gun violence specifically, like real policies, not these nonsense ones we often see? And how important is it to involve survivors in those policy discussions, in your opinion?
Number one, assault weapons ban. And again, that's one of those everybody tiptoes around. Like, we have assault weapons killing massive amounts of people in our country on a daily basis. And that conversation just keeps being pushed aside. High capacity magazines. I mean, you don't need high capacity magazines if you don't have assault weapons. So those are the things that, I mean, we can talk about all these other things, but they're talking points. They're not going to make the difference. What's happening is we have too many high capacity killing weapons on the streets. What was the other question? What can people do?
No. How do you think survivors should be involved in the conversation around policy?
Okay, this is another thing that I've really learned through time is when you are a mass shooting or a shooting survivor, you get re-traumatized super easily with everything that's going on. And so I was, with you doing citizens lobbying. I was citizens lobbying. You were the real deal. I was showing up at these things, and I would show up at the courthouse, and there would be people with their, assault weapons attached to them talking about their gun. I couldn't handle that. So I've had to take a really, really heavy step back in the kind of advocacy I could do. And what I found is people like Sandy and Lonnie who, they lost a family member, and it gives them purpose and a reason to live, right? This gives them a guiding light in which to try to make change happen. The most powerful advocates that I have ever found are the people who've lost somebody that they loved. The people who are the survivors like me, we need to be in healing, we need to be in hope, and we need to pay forward the program that Sandy and Lonnie have put together with mindfulness. I mean, I went through 2 of the different sections of mindfulness with them, and now I'm going to the 3rd to be able to teach people how to meditate who are gun violence survivors. And this is really if you're a survivor of this, your job, my goal is to have peace in my soul, which I never thought I'd have again. But through a lot of the work that I've done and the mindfulness, and I've been able to find that again. And so that's where, my work at this point is in hope and healing, because that's what I have to offer. And then you have the beautiful people like Lonnie and Sandy and these advocates who can go out there and they can stand at the courthouse and they can fight. For me, that's really, really hard at this point for me to have my highest and best life, but I'm in it. I want it. I just gotta I gotta survive my daily life with some peace while I'm doing what I can.
I'd like to jump in and add one thing to what you were saying about the assault weapons ban, and the one fear I have about it. We don't know what this bill says yet, and it can't be the old assault weapons ban, because the problem that they were having with it, and the reason that they let it go ahead and sunset, is because the technology had improved so much that it was outdated. So we have to be sure that whatever bill that they're passing for the assault weapon ban has accessories in it and is addressing the new technology that we've discovered since 1990. It sunsets in 2004, right? Yeah. 2004. So since that time, there's been such improvement in weaponry that we really have to be sure that the assault weapons ban has meat on its bones.
And so just to give you a little bit of what's going to happen here, when we came out, that's the first thing we were screaming also. How in the hell can somebody buy an assault weapon out of the trunk of a car and 1,000 rounds of ammunition without showing his driver's license? We want it banned, and we were going to get it banned right away.
Yeah.
So that didn't happen because we learned that that's not reality. But I'll tell you what can happen. It can be put under Title II of the Gun Control Act, just like the machine gun, and it would be very little trouble to do that. But we're not going to ban it. They're out there. They're going to be out there. We're not going to come take them away from you. We're just going to regulate them so we know where they are, who's got them. You have to pay a high tax, and if something happens, that gun kills somebody, you're going to really pay a high tax.
Yeah, so it will be a ban, but it'll be a more effective ban than the one that we used to have, I think. And the president mentioned that tonight.
I think that's a really important point, Sandy and Lonnie, and Heather, thank you for saying that too. As somebody who's worked on this for a really long time, that is also the issue we had when we were trying to regulate ghost guns here, is because the technology is always changing. And we saw that with bump stocks too, right? Is when we went and we did ban bump stocks in the state of Nevada, thank goodness. But, and that's in big part to Heather, we were able to do that. But, the technology is constantly changing, and these gun lobby people and the NRA are so creative, they'll find any loophole under the sun to get their laws through, or whatever, makes them a profit. All they care about is profits. They don't care about these kids who are being killed. So anyways, I could go on about that for days. Selena, same question for you as a teacher. What would you like to see legislatively, and what solutions do you think are necessary to really address this issue in a real way for our schools and for our teachers.
Yeah, I think I agree with a lot of what has been said so far. I really appreciate that you guys brought up technology changing. I am a history teacher, and so I like to point out to people that guns look a lot different today than they did in 1789 when that amendment was written, or when that Bill of Rights was written, right? Like back then, you had a musket, which you could shoot a single bullet, and then you'd have to reload for about 5 minutes, and then you could shoot again, right? That is very, very different than a weapon of war, which is designed to kill a huge amount of people in a very short amount of time. And I also like to point out that back in 1789, when they wrote that, people didn't own cannons, right? It wasn't just like everyone in their home had a cannon. And so I think that we have to think about this with some common sense. And I do think that having weapons of war throughout the community is a problem, right? There was a decrease when we had fewer of those guns on the market. I also think it is deeply disturbing that shooter was able to go on the day he turned 18, get these weapons of war, immediately take them and put them into effect, right? There was no waiting period. That was essentially a child, right? Like he technically was legally an adult, but at 18, his brain is not fully developed. I really think that we need to make sure only adults can purchase weapons. And I would say an adult is 21, right? I should not have seniors in high school who are technically 18 who could be purchasing firearms, right? That is a concern for me. I also think the waiting period is super important, especially for younger people, especially for people, like you said, who may have mental health issues, that they can just go and purchase something and then immediately use it, right? But I think it's really important to point out, like Lonnie and Sandy did, that just a straight up ban in the old style doesn't necessarily work, right? We need to have smart policy. We need to have policy that is actually enforceable. I appreciate that in Nevada, we have safe storage laws, but how well are those actually being implemented? Are we actually going through and making sure that people are locking up their firearms? Because I can tell you, I don't think they are. Considering just a few years ago, we had a student bring a gun to school in my community because his parents didn't have it secured. And so I think that those are things that we need to look at and we need to have real conversations on. And I'm worried that we get distracted on focusing on the individual schools. Like there was a narrative for a while that a teacher propped open the door at the elementary school, which we have shown was false, was not actually true, but suddenly now it's blame on teachers for propping open doors. That is not the problem here. It is not because a teacher propped open a door somewhere, right? Talking about let's put more metal detectors in schools. Well, guess what? Kindergartners going through a metal detector is not going to solve this problem and would not have prevented the tragedy from last week either, right? And I think too often we go to solutions that re-traumatize our kids. We put in metal detectors and now all of our kids are treated like criminals when they are going to school, right? Instead of eliminating the source of the problem, the source which is causing these children to die in a place where it should be learning and joy.
Yeah, I'd also like to point out that when that amendment or when the Bill of Rights was written, you and I couldn't vote in this country, and neither could most people other than Lonnie. And also, these are the same people who sit over here and tell us what we can and cannot do with our bodies and want my uterus regulated, but are not willing to regulate their fucking guns. So I have no patience for them this week because it just makes me more and more and more and more angry. So sorry for cussing everybody, but that's where I'm at right now.
Well, and I do think that's a central hypocrisy, right? That bans don't work unless it's abortion. If we ban abortion, they will never happen again. And it's like, you cannot have your cake and eat it too, right? You cannot argue that we can't ban anything with guns because it won't work. And in the same breath say, but if we ban abortion, then that will end, right? You have to choose one or the other.
Well, and like Lonnie said, they're already out there. We know that AR-15s are already out there. And I know many people who own AR-15s, right? But at the same time, we can regulate them and make it harder for them to get, and also know who have them. So this way it's better regulated. And like, don't sit here and scream at me about the founding fathers when they were the ones, like you said, I don't think they were, conjuring up AR-15s when they wrote the Second Amendment. Anyways, okay. So this is a question for all of you, just generally, and then we'll, because I could just rage on about, like, I've moved from like sad, like I said, to angry now. So, we talk about gun violence prevention policies at the federal level. What would you all like to see at the state level? We've talked a little bit about some of the stuff that needs to happen at the state level, but Heather, I'm going to start with you because there is a bill that I still believe needs to be passed in the state of Nevada around preemption and the need to actually deal with the fact that only the state can make gun laws in the state of Nevada. So talk to us about the need to overturn preemption.
Well, you just said what I would say. The preemption needs to be overturned. It makes absolutely no sense that the bill with preemption says that the only time you can change gun laws or change anything is during legislative session. The state of Nevada is in legislative session every 2 years. So when Las Vegas, when the mass shooting happened, we could not go and discuss banning the bump stock. We couldn't talk about assault weapons. We couldn't talk about anything that mattered around what happened to all of us there until the legislative session happened. And that's disgusting. Like, we should be able to make decisions. We should be able to make quick, responsible decisions as a state and as a legislative body based on as things are happening. And the preemption clause was slipped into all kinds of states all across the country when nobody was paying attention. And so, Annette, you and I are on the same page with that one.
I rage about that for the rest of my life. That and sex education. Selena, I want to come to you. What do you think needs to happen? I mean, obviously there's a plethora of policy issues that we need to implement to fix our public education system, fund our public education system properly, pay our teachers properly, pay our support staff properly, all of the things. But how do we make our classrooms safer? And how do we make our schools safer so that kids can come to school and not be traumatized every single day like you're talking about, but also make sure that we're keeping all of you safe?
Yeah, I think we've talked about a lot of the stuff that I would propose. I do appreciate that we have made progress in Nevada recently, right? We have done, as you mentioned, some of the actions that have gotten us in a better place, but I definitely think that there is still work to be done. As far as making our schools safer, like I said, I think the safe storage laws, I know we have them, but I definitely think that actually enforcing them is really important. I also think education, like, obviously I'm a teacher, education is always my answer, but I do think education for our community about the dangers and about ways you need to secure your firearms and ways that you can help keep the community safe. I think that oftentimes we just go to, let's just do active shooter drills and the kids will be safe. And that is not the only solution, right? We need to actually look at the supply. We need to look at who has access to these weapons. We need to, like you said, regulate it so we know who has them, so it can be trackable, like Lonnie said, so that if that weapon is ultimately used in some kind of mass shooting or some kind of horrible event, that person can then immediately pay the consequences for that. I think all of those are important actions that we need to take.
Sorry, I was about to sneeze. Yes, absolutely. And I also think too, really looking at the laws on the books in Nevada, we have some pretty important laws on the books, but we also still have some pretty horrifying laws on the books, such as concealed carry for your car, the Castle Doctrine for your car that was slipped in 2015. The Republicans did a lot of damage in 2015 that we have not been able to repeal yet. So there's still, even though Nevada has made great progress in this area, there's still a ton of work to do. And also we need to do a better job at implementing the laws we actually pass, because you're right, Selena, like the safe storage bill absolutely passed, but are we actually enforcing it? Who knows? The extreme risk protection orders passed here. Are we actually enforcing it? Not the way it should be. So we really need to make sure that when we're passing these pieces of legislation that we're actually implementing them. Lonnie and Sandy, before we move to audience questions, I want to come back to you. What other pieces of legislation that are you all looking at? I know in state, we're also looking at things like licensing and a hate crimes bill for things like what happened in Buffalo. But what other pieces of legislation do you all think it's important, maybe at the state level or the federal level?
Well, we worked on the Denver Accord in 2019, and you can pull that up by just doing www.denveraccord.com. But we worked on that, and it really lays out the plan for, in fact, we gave it to Biden before he was president. I don't think he ever read it. I don't think his staff has ever read it, but we keep pushing it out there over and over and over again. We've sent it to congressmen and senators, but it kind of lays out what a good gun violence prevention.
He mentioned 4 of them on his talk tonight.
Yes, he did. But the one thing that we really want to see done is we want to see PLACA repealed at the national level and at the state level, because lots of states still have PLACA laws. That's number one.
Tell our viewers what PLACA is.
Protection of Lawful Commerce in Arms Act. It was passed in 2004.
2005.
It was signed into law in
yes.
2005. They passed the law in 2004 and signed by President Bush. It gives the gun industry protection like no other industry in the country from being sued. If you try to sue a gun manufacturer and the case is dismissed, you can be held liable for the lawyer's attorney's fees of the other side. So it's a very strong law, and it's protecting the gun industry from being sued and gives them carte blanche to do whatever the hell they want to do without fear of any reprisal.
And here's an example. Had we won our lawsuit that Brady filed, if we had won that lawsuit, the only thing we were asking, we weren't suing for money. We were suing to have the online dealer, Lucky Gunner, change their business practices. Had we won that suit, they would not have been able to sell ammunition to the underage killer at the Texas high school in Santa Fe, which happened 3 years after our suit. So there are real consequences to this law. So we'd love to see that repealed. And we'd also like to see demand to have an Office of Gun Violence Prevention that is run by one person that reports directly to the president. Right now, Susan Rice is in charge of that. She's got 15 other things on her plate, at least. And she's the one that told us, get in line and wait when it came to gun violence prevention. So,
by the way, we did sue Lucky Gunner because he didn't ask for the guy's driver's license. They sold 4,000 rounds of armor-piercing bullets to him. And the case was dismissed, and we were fined $260,000 by the judge and put us into bankruptcy.
Oh God.
yes, that's what I say almost every night.
Yeah, absolutely. And yeah, we also have filed, just for the viewers at home, we have asked for, along with Brady, Giffords, and Everytown, we have asked for an Office of Gun Violence Prevention for the state of Nevada. We are still hopeful that the governor and treasurer will invest in that office using the ARPA funds, but we have put in that proposal as well. So I want to get to some audience questions really quickly. Any of you can come in on this, no particular order. So the first question is from Shelby, and Shelby asks, how do we prevent ourselves from becoming a net, jaded and apathetic in the face of constant trauma? Anybody can start.
You know, once you give up on this issue, and Annette, you have far from given up. You're just enraged right now, and rightfully so. And I do not see you as jaded. I see you as purposeful and determined. But once we give up and stay quiet, we're complicit. And we're just as responsible as the other side that we're so critical of. So it's easy, believe me, after as many as we've responded to, it's very easy to throw your hands up and say, it's never going to change. It's never going to happen. It's never going to this. But then we hear these rumblings from other people who are beginning to stand up and beginning to say something and beginning to get involved. And we see the students organizing another march in DC. We see other people some people in the GOP that are beginning to stand up. We have a gun owners group that works with Giffords that are organizing and saying, we're gun owners and we want better laws. So we're seeing teachers that are organizing and doing the same thing. So that gives me hope. Every time I start to get depressed or feel like this isn't ever going to happen, there's something that happens that picks me back up again. And tonight is one of those times, Annette. So thank you.
So I don't want to paint you a rosy.
Glad.
You just, everybody's getting a little pissed off right now. I understand that. But I want to paint you a rosy picture. Government wasn't designed to work quickly. So this is going to take some time. Honestly, we have a Congress right now that's broken. It's broken and it's stuck on itself. And we have obstructionist Senate that's keeping all these bills from being passed. They're all out there ready to go. But what's happening now is we have a filibuster that has stopped everything. And until we get this fixed, we're going to have to take little tiny steps. We may get something this time. We're going to get, the NRA is going to fight it with everything they've got. And we will make some progress and we will get something done, but it's not going to happen overnight. And the battle is going to go on for some time.
But this is when it can happen overnight. It can happen overnight when we all vote in the midterm in November. So if everyone gets out there, registers themselves, gets in that poll, in that booth and votes for people who are committed to making change happen when it comes to gun violence prevention, things can happen overnight. So that's what we've got to do.
This is the one midterm that counts for everything. I mean, it's not just guns on the line, it's our whole democracy.
Yeah. I'd like to jump in. Can you hear me?
Go ahead. Yep.
Okay. The other thing is I think people really defer to somebody else is doing it. And they're not doing a good enough job. And why aren't they doing that? And if you want to know what you can do, start showing up, start participating, start being an advocate yourself, start being a voice. I mean, I was a citizens lobbyist for 2 legislative sessions. I showed up every 2 days a week, the whole legislative session, and there was never an appointment that I couldn't get to meet with people. And I had no idea that I had the access to our legislators that I had until I did it. So I think that when it comes to you're feeling frustrated and you're feeling like they're not doing it, it's because we need you to do it. And you need to start making the calls and calling your senators and showing up at legislative sessions, joining gun violence prevention groups and donating money to them. Donate money to Survivors Empowered. I mean, you need to actually participate instead of hoping somebody else is doing it.
Absolutely, because they're tired of hearing from me, Heather, and they're tired of hearing from you. So let's have some other voices that they can hear from too. All right, here's the next one. Wendy asks, and this is Wendy Bozak, Selena, so I know you know Wendy. She asks, think of the kids who will take the teacher's gun away. Who knows what then? So what do you think about that kind of thought process in our schools and kids getting their hands on other guns?
Excuse me. Yeah. Just inhaled. All right. So, yeah, I think I mentioned this earlier, right? I was concerned about having more guns around our kids and them getting access to it. And hold on one sec. And I think that maybe everyone on the call knows, or maybe they don't, but there was that really horrifying event with an attack on a teacher in Las Vegas, I think about a month or two ago, where a teacher was strangled and assaulted by her student. And assaults on staff are increasing at a really alarming rate. And there's a lot that goes into that, and we don't necessarily need to get into all of that. But if people are assuming that kids won't get access to those guns, yes, they can have access to those guns. And I think that that's a really important point, that a kid could attack a teacher and get access to that gun. And if it's not well secured, well, let's think about that. If someone's coming into my classroom with an assault style weapon and I have securely taken care of my gun, and I have my gun in one place and I have my ammo in the other, and I have to go unlock both of them, I'm going to go run and unlock one, and then I'm going to go run and unlock the other, and then I'm going to load it, and then I'm going to fight back. That doesn't make any sense. And so if the weapon is actually accessible in a scenario like that, then it is also accessible to kids. And that is a problem. And so either of those scenarios is not going to be effective here. And I think that that's a really good point for why arming teachers is not the solution.
It's funny,
So-
that was Richard's point right after this. So I'm glad you made that. Like, you're not going to have time to go to the desk, unlock the drawer, pull out the gun, and then, also defend yourself against an AR-15. That's not real. Heather, you want to
I
chime
was
in?
trying, when I was running for my life, somebody gave me a phone and I was trying to call my son, and I was trying to remember his number, and this is what my hands look like. And I think for people to think that a teacher is going to be able to calmly go and unlock the lock, and they're going to be able to get it open, and they're going to be able to load it and get over there. And like, if the police wouldn't go into a room for 45 minutes, why do we believe teachers can do it? And I could tell you, me trying to call my family to tell them that I was going to die, I couldn't even hold my phone to dial it. I don't see how a teacher could do it. And for people to think that that's a possibility is like irrational.
So Richard has an interesting question, and I'm interested to hear how you all feel about this. So how do we feel about showing the aftermath of shootings, the gored kids, teachers, as a means to push for gun safety? The right to lifers, and he uses that in quotes, have been using these images, and they're fake images, by the way, of aborted fetuses for 50 years. How do you feel about but showing what one of these tragedies actually looks like?
We had, there was a mother in Sandy Hook who took the governor over to see her son in the casket and his wounds. Very brave, extremely brave for her to do. We have another mother in Washington, D.C. that would bring her daughter's autopsy photos, and they were large. They were like a protest sign. And some other survivors were really offended by it. And she said, I'm sorry you are offended by it, but it's my daughter. And I had to wash her hair and put her makeup on because the funeral home didn't do a good job. And I had to do that for her as her last gift. The last gift I could give her was to make her look pretty in her coffin because most of her head was gone. So I applaud those survivors who have that strength, but I also understand, I know what my daughter's wounds were. I don't ever want to see them. I don't ever want them exploited. I talk about them. I talk openly about them. She was shot 6 times with AR-15 223s, and most of her left side of her head was blown off. And I live with that every day, and nobody should live with that. The young man that was with her that witnessed that shouldn't have to live with that. But we also have to be so descriptive and so willing to let the public know that these children here in Uvalde were nothing but mincemeat, and the children in Sandy Hook were nothing but mincemeat, that limbs were torn off and fingers were gone and holes were, these bullets can decapitate small children. We have to hear that as a society and make that be the rallying cry that we don't want our children killed anymore.
But I don't know if that's the answer either, because there was a group of doctors before this happened to us that had tried to, They went to the Congress, they took all the pictures and they got in front of them and they did it over and over again. And of course, the congressmen and the senators, they shut them down. They figured out where they were coming, and they just wouldn't even look at it. And then there's a case of Steve Scalise that was hit in the hip. when he was the baseball game between the Democrats and Republicans they have every year. There was an attack. 2 or 3 were killed. He was shot with an AR-15 and hit in the hip. It bounced off his pelvis, went through the middle of his internal organs, cut up a bunch of blood vessels, and he was bleeding out on the field. It took about 20 minutes for them to kill the guy that brought the gun. They rushed him to the hospital. If there hadn't been a specialist there that knew how to do microsurgery, he would have died. Guess what he did when he got back and got well and got on the floor? He voted against the next gun bill. So what do you say to that?
It's unconscionable is what I say. It's disgusting.
And Annette, can I hop in on this? Because
Yeah, please.
I've been thinking a lot about this in the last week, and especially as a history teacher, again, because I've seen the power a photo can do to change the world. And, you know, there's a series of pictures going around the internet right now, you may have seen it, of a man who is making coffins for the children, and he's making them based on their interests, right? And that's spreading around everywhere. And I've been really divided on those pictures because I'm happy that someone is doing that kindness, right? And trying to make it so that the families at least have that, I suppose, while they are grieving. But at the same time, we're sharing pictures of these brightly colored coffins as if this is a good thing. And people are happy that he's making them so bright and colorful and the interest of the kids. And to me, I think that's kind of shielding us from the horror a little bit. I think we look at a pink and purple coffin instead of what Sandy just described, the true horror of what is inside that coffin. And I think back to Emmett Till, and Emmett Till's mother made sure the world saw what was done to her child. And that picture was horrifying. People that went to see that open casket fainted because it was so awful. And that ended up sparking a huge movement and changing the world. So I think that there is power in that, but I think that Sandy makes a really good point that it has to be the families. It has to be their own decision of what they want to share. And it needs to be done in a way that's not being exploited, but is actually serving the purpose of affecting change, not just let's have more gore for people to gawk at, because I don't think that that's respectful. And I don't think that that is effective.
Yeah. It's interesting. I had the same reaction you did. I'm like, this man is painting coffins, friends. Like, this is not cutesy time. He is painting coffins for children whose limbs were blown off and saw the most horrific thing they could possibly ever see, that no child, no human should ever see in their lives.
And
we have to celebrate this.
We have to also remember that some of those children aren't going to have coffins because they had to be cremated. There wasn't enough left of them to have a coffin or an open coffin. That was the case with Jessie. She had to be cremated. And to live with that, to know that, you know, no matter how beautiful the coffin was and what a wonderful, kind gesture that was of these two gentlemen to do for the community, it's still not okay. And they shouldn't have to make those coffins for these children. That's where we need to be. They shouldn't have to be buried, period.
Couldn't agree more. All right, this next question is for me, and then we're going to go around and have the last word. Richard asks, and this is for me, does BBP have a list of where our Nevada elected officials stand on common sense gun safety? The answer is yes. So first of all, we have our C3 voter guide that some of our elected officials chose to fill out, where we do ask about gun violence prevention. And you can find that on our Institute for Progressive Nevada Facebook page. We'll also put it in the chat so you can take a look at that. Folks like Governor Sisolak and Aaron Ford, our Attorney General, all of them have filled it out. So take a look at that. But as you can suspect, we've also put up a list over the past 2 weeks of where many of the Republican candidates stand on these issues too. As you probably are not surprised, people like Adam Laxalt and Joe Lombardo have A+ ratings from the NRA. And actually, I think Joe Lombardo had a B. It doesn't matter. It's all the same nonsense. So go ahead and take a look at our reel. We'll put that in the chat as well. So this way you all can look at that and see where folks stand with the NRA. I also know that the Second Amendment PAC in Nevada just put out their listings. All of the Republican candidates minus Joe Lombardo got A's and B's, and Governor Sisolak got an F. So I think you know where he stands on the issue. So we want our politicians getting F's from the NRA and NRA affiliated groups because that means they're doing the right thing. The last thing is the question from Matthew J. Wilkie. I'll take this one too. Just know that, yes, we did have a Democratic majority last state legislative session, and we actually passed the ghost guns ban last legislative session, which is a huge win for the gun violence prevention movement. So here in the state, our legislature and our governor did do some great work last session on gun violence prevention like they've done the past several sessions. Most of the inaction that we're talking about is at the federal government level. All of our delegation minus Mark Amadei are supportive of gun violence prevention policies. We just had Congresswoman Lee in our office today, and she was talking about the importance of passing legislation around gun violence prevention. She was also talking about abortion here today, but we know that our delegation is good on this, and our senators are great on this issue and have voted the right way every time a Senate bill has come up. The real issue are the Republicans in the Senate and then folks like Joe Manchin. So hold them accountable. That's who we need to be talking to. All right, so let's go around and have the last word. Lonnie and Sandy, any final thoughts you want to leave us with tonight, specifically on President Biden's words this evening and his speech, or anything that y'all are working on?
Oh, we're working on so much. In fact, we just started to discuss working on a media handbook for how to respond to mass shootings so that they don't traumatize the survivors any more than they have already been traumatized. And we're on a tour this year. We've been detoured twice on our 2022 tour, Honor with Action tour, crossing the country and holding events to bring awareness to gun violence and what needs to be done, meeting with small grassroots organizations everywhere that we go so we can help promote their work, because we know two major gun violence prevention organizations have basically all the money, and these people do all the heavy lifting. So we're trying to connect and network with them to other states where other people are doing similar work that they might not even know about. So we're not always recreating the wheel. And of course, during that time, we're also meeting with as many survivors as we possibly can to let them know that their stories matter if they're willing and wanting to tell them, and that we're there for them, whether they do tell their story or not.
So we know that civil rights, women's rights, all these movements that have took years and years and years, gay rights to come to fruition, took years, and then all of a sudden it happens with one law. So we know it all started from the grassroots. This top-down stuff, the two big organizations that were in power. And when we came in, Brady in every town now, it used to be Mayors Against Illegal Guns, 30 years, no federal legislation. It's not working, folks. It's not working from the top down. It's got to come from the bottom up. That's what we're doing. We're putting the bottom together, and we're going to put this one is going to be another rush. It's going to take all of us working from the bottom. Do what you can do, vote, get your friends to vote, do something, and that's how we're going to win.
Thank you both. Heather, I want to come to you next.
I'm like the hot poker conversationalist tonight. Really, all I can say is just be willing to have uncomfortable conversations. And that an uncomfortable conversation doesn't mean that it has to be an argument or a major conflict. It just means going somewhere and pretending that none of this is happening doesn't benefit anybody. And that I think when we look at our children and our growing children, and you think, what's the world going to be? The conversations with our children needs to be, you need to change the world. and you need to make things different, because if we don't want the world to be the same, or we don't want our state or our country to be the same, then our kids are going to be the ones who are going to have to change it. And I think raising our kids with purpose and intention is maybe the job that we have ahead of us, and to take it on, and, you know, allowing it to just be what it is not an acceptable solution anymore.
Absolutely. Thank you for that. Selena?
Yeah, I honestly appreciate what the last few people have all said, because it's similar to what I'm saying. Is I think that change does take time, right? The movement for women to get the right to vote took 80 years just for them to get the right to vote, let alone equal rights. The ERA amendment is not even passed even today, right? It is, the arc of history is long, but it bends towards justice, right? Because of people getting involved and doing the work. And I think right now there are so many things that are so awful about the world, not just gun violence, but many, many, many issues. And it feels like the world is falling apart, and it feels like there's no good in the world. And I think it's very easy to give into those feelings and become apathetic or become jaded. And I have just decided for myself that I can't do that. I have to believe that we can make change. If I don't believe that to my core, then I'm just going to crumple into a ball every single day, because it is so bad. But I know that people, individual citizens, can make a real powerful change if we come together, and if it is the grassroots. And I love that Heather talked about the kids, because our kids recognize this. Our kids are organizing, our kids are taking action. And what I always teach my students, because I teach them a lot of horrible things in history, a lot of the negatives that have come before, I tell them all of the wrongs of the past are not your fault. But if they continue, they will be, right? It is our job to stop the injustice so that future generations do not have to go through that. And so that gives me hope that we can make a real change.
Thank you so much. And thank you to all of you for sharing your incredible stories and all of the good work that you all are doing. You inspire me to keep going, and you give me hope and the necessary rage to keep going. So I want to say thank you to each and every one of you for all that you do, and for being an inspiration in my life, and for being great friends of mine. And I want to thank all of you at home for watching tonight. I know it's an incredibly hard conversation for us to keep having, but we have to keep having it, and we have to keep talking about it so we can move forward and demand change. So we're calling on all of you. Call all of our elected officials tonight. If you need their numbers, just go on our Facebook page. We can post them in the chat. But call the senators, even though they're supportive of gun violence prevention measures. Call your congressional member, whether it be Mark Amodei, whether it be Congresswoman Titus, Congresswoman Lee, Congressman Horsford, and demand that they make change. Obviously, like I said, many of them are supportive. I think all of them but Mark Amodei are supportive. But in this moment, they still need to hear from you, even if they are supportive, so we can remind them that the majority of Nevadans and the majority of Americans want to see change on this issue, and they are demanding change in this moment. So we're calling on all of you. Take action now. Now is the time to make your voice heard, and we need to do this for the future generations who are coming behind us. So I want to thank you all. If you want to sign up to go to the legislature, like Heather was talking about with us, we will be back there next session. We're already getting ready for next session with our bills. So we're going to need you. We're going to need your voices to be heard. So you can sign up to be a storyteller with us, with Brenda Rodriguez, our story bank organizer. You can also sign up just to be a volunteer or an organizer with us on our Facebook page. You can also sign up for our email list to get all of our actions. So lots of ways to get involved with us. So I want to say thank you to all of you for joining us tonight, and we will see you next Thursday on Out in Front with Annette. Have a great evening, everyone. Stay safe and healthy. All right. Thank you all. It was so good to see you.
Thank you.
I have to say we do a lot of panels.
you.